Imagine our planet without its people. Imagine that every single human being has simply disappeared. This isn't the story of how that might happen. It's the story of what happens to the world we leave behind. In this episode of Life After People, America's capital is under attack. More than 2,000 miles away, Hollywood faces its own threats. While elsewhere, national treasures are at stake. What will survive? Who or what might take our place? And could another capital of mankind emerge at sea? We'll visit the future of our once crowded cities and a haunting site already devoid of man. Welcome to Earth. Population 0. It's day 1 after people. In the rotunda of the National Archives building, the United States Constitution is on permanent display. But one day after people, there will be no one to escort it on its nightly journey to the security vault. The parchment document is preserved in a shatterproof sealed encasement filled with argon, an inert gas that replaces oxygen and moisture-containing air that could wreak havoc over time. But how long can it protect one of America's most precious documents? Nearby, the Washington Monument, built from 82,000 tons of stone, is free from the daily throngs of tourists. The US Capitol building is ghostly quiet. And the statue of Abraham Lincoln gazes on a pool that reflects the absence of human life. In the time of humans, it took a team of 350 to maintain the National Mall. It was already in need of hundreds of millions of dollars in repairs and restoration. How long will the crumbling infrastructure last? Washington, D.C. is threatened by a stealthy enemy.
Moisture is what we battle all the time when we're working on buildings or monuments of this type. It's what's going to act as an accelerant in terms of deterioration.
Once the key to human existence, water now threatens everything man has built. One week after people. In the entertainment capital of the world, the Los Angeles highways are blissfully free of traffic. The 73-story US Bank Tower, the tallest building west of the Mississippi, was designed to be occupied for more than 100 years. It was also built to survive the big one, an earthquake measuring at least 7.5 on the Richter scale. But how long will it stand without human maintenance? We shall see. Two weeks after people. In both the Washington, D.C. and LA zoos, the animals are dying. Elephants are desperate without humans to supply their vegetarian meal intake of 150 pounds per day. Using their superior intelligence and powerful trunks that can lift up to 600 pounds, they break out.
Elephants are actually remarkably well equipped for operating in a world without people. They are able to defend against just about any predator that's likely to come their way.
Before humans appeared in North America nearly 13,000 years ago, mammoths, the distant relatives of modern elephants, dominated the grasslands.
This is a group of animals that did very well indeed in the Americas before we got here, and there's every reason to expect they would do just fine again without us.
They begin new lives in the urban jungles, but will they be able to reclaim their old territory? Meanwhile, 2 weeks after people, 3,000 tons of rubbish lies uncollected in Hollywood. Some sewer systems deliver the rubbish directly to the ocean, where it will add to the floating heap of detritus in the middle of the Pacific. The Great Pacific Garbage Patch, halfway between San Francisco and Hawaii, contains 3.5 million tons of nearly indestructible plastic waste, a floating dump twice the size of Texas. After people, how long will it take before the Pacific Ocean is free of our refuse? Three weeks after people. The lush and manicured image of Los Angeles is getting a facelift of a different kind.
We see Los Angeles as a paradise, but it's a paradise we've created.
In the time of humans, LA residents used 137 gallons of water per person per day, more than half that amount being used to water lawns and plants. 87% of that water came from far away. For more than a century, much of it came from the Owens Valley in southeast California, hundreds of miles to the north, through 2 aqueduct cascades.
This particular cascade is carrying about 125 million gallons of water a day, the major part of the water supply for the city of Los Angeles.
The water travels through a series of power generating plants. When they stop working, the water backs up and begins creating new reservoirs, denying the city its main water source.
If we think about life after people in Los Angeles, all of a sudden there's nobody here to take care of it. No one to control the outflow of the reservoir. No one to control where the water goes in the city.
One month into a life after people, and LA is returning to its natural state.
Los Angeles really is a desert.
Now the thirsty green lawns, trees, and manicured gardens are withering, setting the stage for a massive catastrophe soon to come. More than 2,000 miles away, the problem is quite the opposite. There's too much water in Washington, D.C., and the city is beginning to drown.
Life after people here in Washington, D.C. along the Potomac River will be a very different place. Water levels will be higher, floods will be greater, because more of that water is now flowing through the river rather than being taken away for showers and for bathing and for drinking water in Washington, D.C.
The failure of electric pumps beneath the city unleashes a deluge from the water aquifers, flooding the streets.
One problem with Washington, D.C. is that it was built with permanent-looking architecture on a swamp.
When the first settlers traveled up the Chesapeake Bay and came ashore, Washington, D.C. was marshland. Beaver dams shaped the Potomac River, creating huge wetlands. In the time of humans, Park Service rangers trapped and relocated the beavers that gnawed on the city's famous cherry trees. Now, the beavers are planning a return to power. Two months after people. Across the Potomac, in Arlington National Cemetery, the eternal flame that marks the grave of President John F. Kennedy is also under threat. The flame has been extinguished only once, in 1963, when some tourists poured holy water on it. A constantly flowing natural gas line with an electrically powered relighting system keeps the flame burning. But when the DC power grid fails, the electric relighter also fails. The first heavy rainstorm snuffs the flame forever. It's now 6 months after people. Back in Los Angeles, while some animal populations are desperate for water, others are learning to adapt, including one blood-sucking scourge suddenly deprived of its human protein, the mosquito.
We're sitting here in Los Angeles, a place with a lot of swimming pools. If people disappeared, these swimming pools would go into disrepair, there would be stagnant water. This would be a great place for mosquitoes to breed.
In the time of humans, when the wave of mortgage foreclosures hit Southern California in 2008, West Nile virus cases more than doubled. To blame were the thousands of suddenly abandoned swimming pools where the mosquitoes rapidly reproduced. A single stagnant pool can support hundreds of thousands of the pests. Within a year of life after people, the natural world is rapidly taking over the city streets. Soon, it will set off a chain of devastating events, turning great cities into capitals of destruction. It is now 1 year after people, and America's monuments are under attack. Towering some 550 feet, the Washington Monument is the tallest freestanding masonry structure in the world. The load-bearing walls are 15 feet thick at the base and 18 inches thick at the top. Completed more than 125 years ago, it was designed to last for centuries. But even in the time of humans, the stone was already beginning to deteriorate.
We can see up close some of the deterioration that just happens on a regular basis. We can see the deterioration of the mortar joints and the patching that's been done over time. And this is a really good example here. We can see that even though this was recently renovated, we've already lost this material. So even in that short time span, the deterioration cycle is just ongoing. It's only 100 years of deterioration, but it shows the kind of loss of surface that we get and the kind of loss that we would imagine would occur as we move forward.
One year after people. Despite the neglect, the US Capitol building appears unchanged. Even the dome, made from Civil War-era cast iron, is holding off the elements.
The first year, you wouldn't expect to see much change. However, that cast iron dome is painted, and over time, the paint protective system will start breaking down. So you would expect to see some rusting starting to become visible as the iron is exposed from the paint.
The solid marble of the Lincoln Memorial is hinting at a future without human care. With no routine cleanings, the blocked drainage pipes are starting to cause cracks and water damage to the roof. The vertical span protecting Abraham Lincoln also contains steel beam reinforcement.
The tragic flaw is the roofing system. You'll have water penetration in, and where you have water and you have steel, you have corrosion.
The nation's monuments remain under attack. But which one will stand the longest? It's 3 years into a life after people, and the center of Los Angeles is an overgrown metropolis. LA's famous freeway system has gone green.
The concrete itself would be relatively invisible within a very, very short period of time. The roadways themselves are great seed corridors. So the winds, the natural winds that we get, would drive a lot of seeds and other materials down those open corridors.
Grasses and other small plants quickly take over. Soon, trees begin growing, their roots tearing apart the concrete. A decade after people, and Los Angeles is becoming a desert once more.
Probably within a few years, you begin to see the non-native plants dying out and the native plants coming back and gradually taking over.
Without the aqueduct bringing in billions of gallons of water, the huge Canary Island palm trees lining the streets of Beverly Hills are now decaying trunks. This non-native tree was imported in the 1930s to add to the city's exotic appeal. But it requires an average of 30 gallons of water a day. And after 10 parched years, it slowly dies from the top down. Los Angeles is almost unrecognizable. But it's nothing compared to what's coming. Wildfires can burn for weeks, and even longer if the conditions are right. In 2007, the Zika fire in Santa Barbara County raged for 2 months, the longest burning wildfire in recent California history. Now, when a lightning strike sets off a fire in the hills, there won't be any firefighters coming to the rescue.
The mountain fires that we see virtually every year here in Los Angeles would penetrate into the urban setting, and you have the potential for a major fire event.
In the city center, the US Bank Tower burns from the inside out. The structural steel frame can withstand the searing heat, enduring temperatures of over 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. But the interior spaces burn quickly, turning LA's tallest building into a charred skeleton. The stainless steel panels of the Walt Disney Concert Hall are virtually fireproof, but the flames consume the plant life that grows between them. In Hollywood, the rotting wood of Grumman's Chinese theater is engulfed in mere seconds. But the foot and handprints of Tinseltown legends embedded in cement easily survive the inferno. The famous Hollywood sign is engulfed as its acrylic latex paint feeds the fire. But the 50-foot-tall letters will survive the scorching, because although they look like wood, they're actually made from steel. It's 50 years into a life after people. Now, 200 years overdue, the big one hits Los Angeles. The US Bank Tower is a charred, teetering steel skeleton. The upper 21 floors have earthquake-damping struts installed between floors, but after wildfire damage and years without maintenance, they can't fend off the inevitable.
If you think about a bullwhip, a slight flick of the wrist will create a big motion out at the far end of the bullwhip, and it'll snap. Well, it's the same thing with the building. Part of the top of the building could just topple away because it's moving. It's the tip of the bullwhip.
Not far away, the 32-story LA City Hall is the tallest structure in the world fitted with a base-isolated anti-earthquake mechanism.
What the base isolators do is they allow the building to remain relatively stationary while the ground shifts beneath it.
But the base isolators rely on rubber bearings to absorb the shock and minimize vibration. After fire damage and 50 years without maintenance, the rubber has deteriorated. City Hall is doomed.
Despite the extra technology, nothing lives forever, especially in the Los Angeles basin.
And that includes another icon of the silver screen. The landmark Hollywood sign is coming down. The quake shears off the corroded bolts that once held the letters securely to girders sunk in the bedrock. Faster than most American cities, Los Angeles is shedding its human skin. But Washington, D.C. faces a very different fate. "100 years after people, man's legacy is fading in some places and growing in others. A water bottle from the California coast will float for many years before it's sucked into the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. Still expanding as more plastic refuse from North America, China, and Japan arrives. The century-old plastic materials will remain intact far into the future.
Because of the durability of some of the plastics that we have produced, we will actually see evidence of those outlasting the evidence of the substantial buildings that we've built in steel and concrete and timber.
After a century on permanent display at the National Archives in Washington, D.C., the Constitution document is facing an invisible danger. The encasement seals are failing, allowing in air molecules, and the oxygen content increases to 0.5%. But no known microorganisms can attack the parchment without at least 2% oxygen. So the documents will be safe for a few more years at least.
You still would have a good, relatively airtight and moisture-proof container for the document.
The words of America's founding fathers will live on as long as the roof holds out. Over the last century, the beavers have been busy. New tree growth on the National Mall allows them to build dams and cut new water channels from the flooding Potomac River. Across the wetlands, the dome of the US Capitol is rusting. With the paint long gone, moisture is forcing open the joints in the cast iron sheets, attracting pigeons and other birds into the openings. Because the dome is built atop an iron truss system, much like the girders of a bridge, it's an ideal nesting place.
The birds will build their nests there. When it rains, the rain will collect there. That nesting material will hold it like a sponge. against the iron will continue to corrode.
Corrosion is also setting in on another famous structure in Los Angeles. The Walt Disney Concert Hall was built with stainless steel, one of the most anti-corrosive metals. Its protective oxide layer prevents corrosion from forming. After 100 years, the oxide is fading and the silver panels are slowly changing to the color of dried blood. The Walt Disney Concert Hall is now a spectacular sculpture of rust. Corrosion is also pulling apart what's left of the freeway overpasses, and rain is transforming some parts into a world of water.
A number of locations here in Los Angeles, our roadways are actually below grade. So when the water falls, we have to be able to collect it. We have drainage inlets like this in the roadway. The water collects in the drainage inlet, and it goes to pumps that pump the water out.
Now the inlets are clogged with debris, and the pumps stopped working long ago. Dozens of small lake ecosystems dot the freeways.
It'll be a gathering place for the animals because animals will come down out of the adjacent mountains, and the freeway corridors are a relatively straight, easy shot for them to use to migrate from place to place. So it'll be actually a nice little reservoir.
With the prey come the predators. The jumbled overpasses are now points of ambush. It's 150 years after people, and the descendants of North America's zoo elephants are enjoying their life.
You could expect to see substantial herds within the first 100 to 150 years after the original pioneers break loose from the sanctuaries or from the zoos. A lot of the pasture land that will be left behind when we disappear would be ideal foraging country for elephants. And I think the elephants would have no trouble at all in making a living.
"250 years after people." In Washington, D.C., the Lincoln Memorial is in dire straits. A few of the highly corroded steel roof girders snap. And the Lincoln statue is no more. Atop the weakened cast-iron dome of the U.S. Capitol building, the 15,000-pound bronze Statue of Freedom is now the architect of destruction.
The statue's trying to pull on one side of the dome and push on the other side of the dome. That then means that the entire statue will punch down through the dome and it will all slump over like a wedding cake.
Centuries without maintenance have caused the rotunda of the National Archives building to collapse, exposing the U.S. Constitution to the elements. Still protected inside its encasement, wind and rain are not the greatest threat. It's sunlight. The damaging ultraviolet rays cause ink to fade, and within a few years, the words are slowly erased from history. "500 years after people." The Washington Monument is losing its battle with nature, its stone blocks chipping away with time. At the tip is a small aluminium pyramid.
When it was built in the 19th century, aluminum was a very precious metal. It was actually valued more than gold or silver. It was put up there essentially as a lightning rod.
In the 1930s, 8 copper rods were extended around the pyramid to help arrest the lightning. The aluminium pyramid outlasts the corroded copper rods, but has lost its ability to channel lightning bolts. Lightning strikes the Washington Monument an average of once a year, a long-term threat to the pyramid. "500 years after people, the masonry structures of Washington, D.C. are disintegrating. 9,000 miles away, this has already happened at a mysterious site once the great capital of men. Six centuries into a life after people. In great cities like Washington, D.C., brick and stone are the only remaining markers of human architecture. How do we know this? On the other side of the world is another great capital city abandoned long, long ago. Deep in the interior of Cambodia, 5 ancient towers rise like thistles from the surrounding jungle. This is Angkor Wat, the largest religious monument in the world. Surrounding it are dozens of smaller temple complexes. In 1860, Henri Maout, a French explorer hacking through the jungle, discovered these great towers. His journals introduced the world to Angkor Wat. For more than 500 years, Angkor was the center of the Khmer Empire, a civilization ruled by all-powerful kings. Their culture of building colossal stone monuments rivals that of the ancient Egyptians.
They are massive. As you can see, enormous size, and they probably weigh anything between 2.5 to 3 tons. These exceptionally fine joints, there's no mortar between them. They're just laid one on top of the other, and they're fixed by gravity.
Evidence indicates that Angkor Wat was abandoned nearly 600 years ago in 1431, after enemy Siamese soldiers ransacked the temple.
Everything began to go downhill because there was no maintenance of these vast temples that required thousands of people to maintain them. Nature took over almost immediately, and within 100 years, it was engulfed by forest.
Of all the temple complexes in the area, Angkor Wat is the best preserved. Most agree that a nearby community of Buddhist monks worked to save it from the jungle's grip. But the other abandoned temples in the area saw no human intervention for 600 years, and the jungle showed no mercy. Beng Melia is a smaller version of Angkor Wat. In 2002, a team of archaeologists finally began to peel back the jungle. Nature had the temple in a death grip. On a daily basis, the temple stone is being ripped apart by tree roots. At Beng Melia, it's the prolific strangler fig, a type of ficus tree.
So here is probably one of the best examples of the damage these trees can do. This is a ficus, and it always grows from the roof downwards. The birds like the seeds of this tree, and they eat the seeds, and the seeds will germinate in the bird's stomach, and then it'll excrete them out onto the top of the roof, and the seeds will then start developing, growing. The roots will come down into the ground, soak up an enormous quantity of water, and then slowly, slowly expand the roots. In this case, it's actually broken through the stone, and you can hear it's hollow. The roots come right the way through, and it causes untold damage.
The assault is relentless. In many cases, when the ficus tree grows old, a new ficus grows up and devours it.
Here you have a very good example of a ficus that is entwined around one of the old trees, the original tree here, and it's wringing the life out of it. And the tree is now actually causing a lot of trouble to the structure because it's got quite a sail effect. And once the winds go, it starts swinging around, and this causes an enormous amount of destruction.
At the nearby temple of Ta Prohm, silk cotton trees use their oversized roots to jack apart the stone blocks.
This tree is holding up this entire shrine. The roots are growing from beneath the shrine. Look here, for instance, at where this lintel is separated from a window jamb. It's only hanging on an inch of bearing surface. I'd say in 2-3 years, at least this half of the building will be on the ground. This little plant is the culprit. The roots of the plant travel into the stone and the joints, seeking moisture and nutrients.
As the roots expand over many years, they pry apart the stone until a single load-bearing element dislodges, bringing down the entire structure. Hundreds of years of unhindered growth has done immense damage. But one tiny insect needed only a few years to impose its destructive power.
I'm standing on top of a giant termite mound in the portal to a shrine. This thing must be 7 feet tall. It's an extinct population of termites. Certainly after abandonment of the site in the 15th century, they went to town, working, eating the wooden ceilings, and furnishings, and fittings throughout the place.
Wildlife of all kinds inhabited these sacred monuments for centuries. When men moved out, the animals they most feared moved in. Even today, the deadly king cobra favors the temples closest to the encircling moats. And in 2003, a hunter near Bengmelia survived an attack by 2 Bengal tigers. The cats were reportedly living in the destroyed temple complex. The fate of these deteriorating temples will be the same visited upon the world's capital cities. "600 years into a life after people, without anyone to repair and protect great monuments, nature will slowly and inevitably take sole possession." "600 years after people. The era of great collapses in our capital cities is almost over. The previous centuries have witnessed the destruction of houses of brick, wood, and rigid towers of steel. The last recognizable edifice still standing in Los Angeles is the heavily corroded US Bank Tower. The steel skyscraper survived the wildfire that charred the rest of Hollywood and much of the LA basin. The big one snapped off its top 21 floors. The lower 52 floors defied the odds for hundreds of years.
This building is an odd one in that it has a central core that's fairly stiff concrete, and it has a steel framing around the edges. The concrete core would have collapsed sooner if the building was in a climate that had more freeze-thaw cycles, but this doesn't really happen in LA. Earthquakes are what's going to get you.
A moderate quake finally brings down the weakened structure. Little has changed in the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. Over centuries, the sunlight causes the plastic to photodegrade into smaller and smaller compounds. Now, it's a poisonous stew containing immeasurable toxins like PCBs. Ocean creatures and birds continue to ingest the plastic soup, and the garbage patch lives on long after people. After 1,000 years, Washington, D.C. has become like the lost city of Atlantis. Centuries of sea level rise are drowning the evidence of a once great capital.
We'd expect a good portion of the mall to be underwater, and many of those monuments to be capsized, something like modern Alexandria today in Egypt, where a number of the monuments are underwater and capsized over.
Peering hauntingly through the waves are the ruins of the U.S. Capitol.
The various rooms in our Capitol would become exposed to the sky. It would start looking like what we see in Rome with the Forum.
The Washington Monument is no longer a proud structure. Erosion and the encroaching seas are causing the foundation to sink. Submerging is the only chance it has to survive intact.
The buildings, they're going to sink beneath the waves, they're going to get covered with mud, sand and silt, and those will encase the remains of the buildings and effectively fossilize them.
Atop the sinking stone edifice, the aluminium pyramid is discolored by lightning strikes, but still recognizable.
In life after people, after tens of thousands of years, that aluminum pyramid could be the last clearly man-made object left in our Capitol.
Unlike naturally occurring metals, aluminium contains an oxide coating that protects and preserves it. On one side of the pyramid is the inscription, Laus Deo, praise be to God, a nation's final words for the future.